Hi, I'm Sarah. Welcome back to my channel. I'm super late, but I'm still going to tell you guys about the books I read in December and January. So life kind of threw me a little bit of a loop there. I filmed my last, I think, 3 or 3.5 videos at the very end of December while I was on like a break from school. And I would have filmed more, except I had to have a wisdom tooth removed in that time period. And I was like swollen and just kind of, wallowing and feeling sorry for myself right up until I had to go back to school. So I just worked on editing the ones I had, and then I ran out of those to edit and post. So I know it's been a little while. I'm still at it, I'm still doing it, just kind of hit a little bit of a rough patch there in terms of filming. So I have not, however, stopped reading. I've read a bunch of books. I did not even realize how many books I'd read in December and January till I wrote them down for this list and was like, oh, this is a lot. This is gonna be a long video. So let's get going. My favorite book for that month was One to Watch. I recommend this if you just want a reasonably lighthearted, easy read. This book was perfect for what it was. It's the story of a plus-size blogger who gets invited to participate on a Bachelor type show. I say type, but it's exactly The Bachelor. It's just not called The Bachelor in that universe, where she's going to be like the Bachelorette, and she's going to have all these men to pick from, and she's going to be like the first plus-size woman to ever be on this TV show. And as I was reading this, I was like, has there ever been a plus-size Bachelorette? Like, I think this book is actually doing something that apparently ABC has never thought of or bothered to do. It's so weird to me when I realized that. Like, it seems like such a basic thing they would have done, but correct me if I'm wrong, I don't watch this show, but I don't think they've done it. So I just like this kind of book. It's taking like a silly reality TV show, it's going like behind the scenes. I thought several of the romances were cute and fun and interesting to read about. Just the whole process of the show. My only complaint with it was like the romance she ultimately ends up choosing was not one of the ones I was more invested in. I liked other ones more, but we ended up where we did, and it was a good read. I enjoyed the writing, I enjoyed the main character. Do I think this book is a literary genius? No, but for what it is, I thought it was perfect, and I really enjoyed reading it. It's lighthearted, but it also has this kind of more serious edge to it because it really does look at what a plus-size bachelorette would end up dealing with in terms of like internet hate comments and just other unfortunate things like that. It doesn't shy away from that. It's part of the story. I appreciate that it's there. Like, seriously, ABC, why have you not done this yet? Why? My next favorite was Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I'm a little late to game on this one. I'm pretty sure this was popular a year or two ago, but I really enjoyed this. I don't generally like a lot of the YA mystery thrillers just because I think they tend to go a little light on the mystery. The mysteries just are not as strong in YA as they are in adult. I thought this one did a pretty good job. I thought there was a decent amount of focus on the actual mystery. The way it went through it kind of procedurally wise, like you might do with like a cop mystery or something like that. This book is about a girl who is trying to solve the disappearance of another girl from her small town. I think the girl disappeared something like 5 years ago. And for her senior project, this girl decides she's going to investigate, and she says she's doing it to like examine how the media looks at these cases, but like honestly she has every intention of solving this mystery, and that's what she ends up doing. The explanation, like the solution's a little far-fetched, but sometimes you gotta make it far-fetched or it's just too easy to guess. So I respect it. I respect what it did. I plan on reading the sequel that's coming out in March, so stay tuned to hear my thoughts on that. I read another YA. This one's more of like a psychological thriller. It's called The Last Secret You'll Ever Keep. This is actually an ARC. This does not come out until next month. It's kind of a sequel to another book that I have not read called Jane Anonymous. It takes place in the same universe. I haven't read Jane Anonymous. I don't know that I missed anything by not having read that first. This is about a young woman who is kidnapped and held in a well for several days, and she escapes and she gets back to town, and nobody believes her because she can't take them back to the place where she was held. Some parts of her story just don't really make sense. Like, she says she was given this fairy tale book, and like all these scholars or everything are like, those fairy tales don't exist, that book doesn't exist. And she has a history of PTSD from something that happened when she was a child, so no one believes her. She's going out and trying to find the place herself and trying to find proof of the things she says she experienced, and she's not able to, and she's also like losing chunks of time. It's one of those psychological thrillers where you're reading it and you're not 100% sure if she's like kind of an unreliable narrator type thing. I enjoyed it. I enjoy this author's writing. I've read several other books by her. My only criticism is that I feel like sometimes at the end, like when the climax of the book was happening, I was having a hard time telling what was really happening and what the protagonist was just perceiving as happening. And I don't think that was intentional. Like at that point, I don't think I was supposed to be like, oh, did that really happen or not? I think I was supposed to know, and I didn't when I was reading it. I was just kind of like, is this really happening? I don't understand. So I feel like in some of the other books, the endings get a little muddled too, and everything doesn't like quite come together, and like every little unexplained thing isn't explained. Some people don't mind that. I prefer things to tie up a little more neatly. But overall, I thought it was a good book. I thought it was a good examination of trauma and what can happen after that. So I would recommend this one. Goodnight Beautiful was one of my books of the month. This is another psychological thriller about a psychiatrist? I can't remember if he's a psychiatrist or psychologist, but he has a practice, he has these patients, and he and his wife have moved into this house in this new town, and he's talking to his patients, and there's like a way with the venting where you can eavesdrop on his meetings, and then he goes missing. It's hard to describe this book without like giving away too much, but there are some impressive twists in this book. Like, I would recommend reading this in a physical copy, because when I got to these twists, I was baffled, and I wanted to flip back and reread passages. Like, how did this get past me? How did they do that? How did she do this? I have to give it a lot of credit for that. I was really interested in this book and really surprised by it. But I will say I don't think she stuck the landing. I think she had her twists, and then it just kind of was like for the finish. So 4 stars for the twists alone. They were outstanding. But it does just kind of end with a whimper instead of a bang. And then I also read or finished Slayer and The Wife, both of which I'm not going to talk too much about right now, because you can see me talk more about those in my video where my husband picked my books. That was why I originally read these. But Slayer is a book in the world of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The story is a Slayer that's not Buffy. She's someone that's been called after the events of the TV series, and it follows her story. The Wife is another psychological mystery thriller about a woman whose husband has been accused of sexual assault. Both of these were 3 stars. I'd say The Wife is fine. If you're looking for a mystery thriller and it's around, it's totally fine. I do think there's books that do this better than this one did. The Slayer book, if you're a Buffy fan, you'll enjoy it, but it is a very YA type book. So if you're a Buffy fan such as myself that's, 30 something, I do read YA, but it was very YA, and I felt like it didn't need to be. So keep that in mind. And then my 2-star books for the month of December that I did not love. First one was Unorthodox. This is about a woman who escapes from an ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, Hasidic Jewish, I think it is. And I listened to this on audiobook, and I almost didn't get through it because the first 50% of this is just about her childhood. And her childhood is just, it's not what I'm there for. I'm there for her becoming a very young wife and mother and then escaping the community. That's what I wanted to read about, and just too much of the book was about her childhood. The problem is she wrote this book while she was 24 and still actually in the midst of escaping. I believe she actually began it before she actually left the community. There's no perspective because she's still in the middle of it and it's still all happening. I don't even think her true escape was finished. And that's the more interesting stuff, I think, is where she went after she escaped and what she ended up doing with her life. And we just barely learn anything about that. I think the reason that so much of her childhood was in this book is because she was so young when she wrote it that, if you're telling your life story, At that point, your childhood's still like half of your life or more. Probably seems a lot more interesting than it does by the time you're my age. And get a little perspective and realize that a lot of the stuff she writes about feeling like a misfit as a child or not feeling understood by her teachers or her grandparents that took care of her, that stuff's pretty universal. Which is good, it's fine, but it's not what people are going to be reading that book for. They're going to be reading it because they want to know how the life in that Jewish community was like different. It was a struggle to get through the first half. Once we got to the part where she started doing like the, I guess you call it courtships maybe, her marriage, and then her like, when she started taking steps to get out of the community, that got much more interesting. Honestly, if this sounds like an interesting story to you, the TV show was fantastic. It's rare for me to like a TV show or movie over the book, but this is definitely one of those cases. Loved the TV show, did not enjoy the book. I would love to read, I don't know if she's written, I should probably look and see if she's written like any kind of a follow-up to this as an adult, because I believe she's in her 30s now, and I think that would be much more interesting to read. And then my least favorite of the month of December was When We Believed in Mermaids. I think part of the problem with this book was I thought there was going to be more mystery to it. The premise is that this woman, she's, I don't know, she's in her 30s, she's a doctor in California, and she's watching the TV one day and she catches a glimpse in a background shot somewhere in New Zealand of her sister that is supposed to have been dead for 15 years. So she goes to New Zealand to try and find this sister. Yeah, it seems like it's going to be like a setup for a big mystery, but it's not. There was a train crash and she pretended she was dead and skipped the country, and she's been living in New Zealand ever since. That's it. And I feel like that's not a spoiler because we learned this very quickly in this book. So that's the mystery I thought I was like signing myself up for, but it really wasn't. So I'm like, okay, so it's about, you know, these two sisters and like their weird childhood and how they grew up. When they were kids, their parents were just a little wild, I guess would be a good word for it. And their family had taken in this like boy, this 15-year-old boy that just kind of like appeared one day. And he was kind of like the one that was almost like raising these girls. And again, I thought we were going to get like more, like there was going to be some mystery to his backstory or something, but there wasn't. It was just like, oh yeah, he appeared. He was definitely abused or something, but we never find out where he came from or how he ended up there. It's just not important to the story, I guess, or not important to the story this author wanted to tell. And the book just kind of drags for a while once the sister, Kit, I think her name was, is in New Zealand looking for her sister Josie. I think Josie was her original name. Kit ends up getting like very easily sidestepped or sidetracked by this man she meets. And then it kind of like turns into a romance. I'm okay with like a side romance, but it felt like it was taking up way more of the plot than I thought it should. Like it almost became like that was what she went to New Zealand for, was to find a romance, because you know you can't be in your 30s and single and happy, obviously. So she's just in New Zealand having this romance instead of looking for her sister that's been gone for 15 years. And the sister is off living her life. It's pretty bland, but she just had this house she's moved into, and she's like trying to solve this mystery about the former owner of the house that was murdered. She's like kind of trying to solve it through these diaries she finds and everything. So all this is going on, and the sisters kind of reunite eventually, and then the book just like ends. Like everything gets resolved almost like off page, and we like skip ahead a couple months and it's like, oh yeah, she solved that mystery off camera. And oh yeah, the sister issues are all resolved now, and the romance is resolved, and everything's fine, and it all just happened. Like, I literally think the author was writing this book, and everything previous to this ending, she takes her time with this excruciating detail, and all these like little moments and flashbacks, and just all this buildup. And then she was like, yeah, I'm done with this book. I'm fucking done with it. And just wrapped everything up in this really short little epilogue. And I felt betrayed. I was confused. I didn't like it. I don't think I'd read anything by this author again, even though previous to that, even though it wasn't quite like the mystery I thought I signed up for, I had been enjoying the story that was being told. And then it was just over. Whatever, that's all I have to say about that one. And then in January, I also read 8 books. Several of these books are eARCs from Netgalley, which means a couple of them have not yet been released, and I will make note of which ones those are. My favorite book for the month was The Year of the Witching. This came out, I think, last fall, and it would have been a great book to read for like Halloween or something, which I think a lot of people did. I did not realize that this book, I think it actually is a horror book. I thought it was more like historical fiction about like a Salem witch trials girl based on the cover, and that's not what it is. It's like an alternate universe type thing. The culture in this book, it is kind of like a Salem witch trials type place. It's almost like extreme Mormonism, where they have like these prophets that have like multiple wives, and when one prophet dies, usually like his son takes over and becomes the new prophet and then runs the town. But like magic actually is real in this universe. We learn that very quickly. The main character, Emmanuel, like her grandmother has this gift, and her grandfather used to have this like gift to heal people. People have visions. But Emmanuel's mother and father are both dead, and she's being raised by her grandparents. They live in this city that's kind of like surrounded by this woods that you're not supposed to go into because there's these witches that live in the woods. And Emmanuel one day stumbles into the woods and encounters these witches. Yeah, things kind of go from there. They start bringing about these plagues, and it gets really good. I'm not really like a horror reader, but I thought this was like linear enough, and it was spooky, and there was magic, but there was also like a little bit of mystery element to it as Emmanuel's trying to like learn more about her mother and father and what happened to them. I just really enjoyed it. I gave this 5 stars. I would highly recommend it if you're looking for something a little spooky, but I think it's YA. If it is, it's very well done for YA. And if it's not, it's adult that I think would still be accessible to like older YA readers. Give this one a try. My next favorite was called In the Quick. This was an eARC, so I read this for free in exchange for an honest review. This one is about a young woman whose uncle? Yeah, it's her uncle. Her parents are dead. I don't know, it's not really important. And she's raised by her aunt and uncle. And her uncle was this really gifted scientist that designed stuff for spaceships. He dies tragically, and afterwards she's living with her aunt, and her aunt sends her to this school for kids that are being trained to become astronauts. I'm completely blanking on the main character's name, but she's a very gifted, engineer-minded girl herself, and she's at this school, and then when she turns 18, she actually becomes an astronaut and goes into space, and she has this goal to find out what happened to this spaceship that failed and kind of disappeared when she was a child. If you read the description of this book, you might think it's a lot more action-y paced. Don't go into it expecting that because you'll be disappointed by that. It's not like a real action book. It's much more slow and meditative about like the little things about being in space, you know, like your feet swelling up and just little moments like that she experiences while she's in space. I really enjoyed it. I love that type of sci-fi. It's more like the space between worlds. I'd say the space between worlds was more action-y than this is, but the writing reminded me of the two. That's the kind of sci-fi I like, is when the characters are really feeling it, and like I in turn get to really feel like the enormity of something like going into space or going into a different world. I don't want to just be like, oh yeah, I'm hopping between worlds. I want it to be like angsty. And that's what this book was. And I quite enjoyed it. There's a lot of stuff I felt like she kind of just left unexplored. Like I mentioned, these are schools for teenagers to train them to become astronauts. Like people die at these schools. And I think it's kind of implied too that these are like not wealthy students, many of them, that they're like sent there because they're like brilliant, but also because like they might die. And it never really gets much into that. It never explains how these kids end up going there. It's kind of like just barely hinted at, and I think we could have done more with it. I also did not love the romance. I thought it was going a different way than it did. And then when it circled back around, I was like, no, I'm not into this. But one more small annoying thing, and I don't know if this will be in the like final version or if this was just something about reading like an uncorrected proof, but there were no quotations around speech. And that drives me nuts. I think it was done intentionally. I think it was done kind of as like a gimmick because it makes you feel somehow more like I don't know, dreamy, ethereal. I don't know how that works, but it does. And it is an effective strategy in that regard, but it's also just annoying. Like, I don't like it. It's a gimmick. It does not work for me. If that's in the final version, I think it was a mistake. Overall, it was a good story, and the writing was good, and I enjoyed it. I read my first Colleen Hoover this month. I read Verity, the recommendation of a former coworker of mine. She texted me and was like, hey, have you read this book? And I was like, no, but it's actually sitting there on my Kindle, so I guess I could. And I like this more than I expected to. Colleen Hoover is generally a romance writer, and that is definitely apparent in this book. I think she did a really good job of blending her like what I assume is her normal like steamy romance writing with like a psychological thriller. There's a lot of explicit sex scenes in this book. I thought they were well done, and I thought they fit in pretty well with the plot. Like, it's not just like we're trying to solve this mystery or whatever, and the main characters keep stopping to have all this X-rated sex or whatever. It's very essential to and incorporated into the plot. And the suspense, I think, is good. I thought it was suspenseful. My only problem with it was I thought the resolution was a little far-fetched. Like, probably impossible, not to give anything away, but that was kind of my only problem. But overall, for a romance writer, like, venturing into a different genre and kind of trying to like merge the two, I was impressed with how good this was. This is about an author that has been hired by the husband of another more popular author. Her name's Verity, and Verity is in a coma due to an accident, and her husband hires Lowen, who is a successful but less successful author, to kind of ghostwrite Verity's last 2 books to fulfill her contract. So Lowen goes to their house, and she's going through all of Verity's paperwork and boxes and everything, and she stumbles across basically like Verity's diary and starts learning that there might be some hidden secrets in Verity's past. It was well done. If you like mystery thrillers and you like steamy romances, I would give this one a go. If you like steamy romances and think you might want a little more mystery in your life, give this one a try. I thought it was surprisingly good. The Star-Crossed Sisters of Tuscany. This one I gave 4 stars, and I do think it's a good book, but this one took me forever to get through. Like, when I was reading it, I would enjoy it. I just never felt any like urge to go back and read more of it. Like, I felt like I knew how it was gonna end, and I kind of did, which doesn't usually bother me in like this type of sweet, predictable story. But for some reason, I don't know. This is about a family where there's a supposed curse that every second daughter will never find true love. Amelia is the main character, and her great aunt Poppy, who was a second daughter herself, is taking Amelia and her cousin Lucy, another second daughter, on this trip to Italy to try and break the curse. So there's everything I like in this book. There's fun travel stuff, there's a little romance, there's a little bit of mystery, and I enjoyed it. And I can't really think of anything I didn't like, but just for some reason when I was reading it, I just like, oh yeah, I guess I could read that. I don't know, does that happen to anybody else? Tell me if this happens to you ever, even with books you like. And then Not Our Summer is another one of the eARCs I read. This was a fun one. This is just about these 2 cousins that don't like each other, and their grandfather has died, and in his will he said that in order for them or their mothers to get any of his inheritance, the 2 cousins have to go on this trip together, or actually it's a series of trips. And it's fun. They go to like the Grand Canyon, I think they go to Yellowstone, they go to Florida. They get sent all these little trips paid for by their grandfather, obviously with the goal of making them friends. And it's cute and it's fun, and I quite liked it. My only problem with it was I felt like there was a couple of opportunities where this author could have done more with it, where like we kind of like get right up to these more serious issues, and then they just kind of get like, just kind of walk by them. Where she had the opportunity to go a little deeper. She had an opportunity to do more with this book, and she just kind of like played it safe. The result is it's a really fun, light read, but it could have been more. I feel like if she maybe would have gone a little deeper with some of the issues, like the class differences between the 2 sisters, for example, or KJ's relationship with her mother, I feel like it could have been more. But I did really like it. I believe this book comes out in April. I'd recommend if you're looking for a fun YA travel type book. The Wife Upstairs, I think this is a retelling of Jane Eyre, and I have not actually read Jane Eyre, so I can't really comment on how closely it follows that story. But this is a mystery thriller about a young woman who is dog walking in this rich neighborhood, and she manages to kind of intentionally catch the eye of a rich widower and marries him and moves in with him, then starts to get a little suspicious about what happened to his wife. And it was good. I liked reading it. I just didn't love it. I didn't. I have a hard time pinpointing what I didn't quite like about it so much. I think it was just too predictable. Like, there was no big twist or reveal or anything. Like, you know from the title where the wife is. There wasn't much to it for me. I didn't hate it, but it's not one I would really recommend to anybody else. There's much better books out there. If I Disappear is another ARC I was able to read through Netgalley. I was really let down by this one. This is a mystery thriller about a woman who's obsessed with this podcast, and the person that runs the podcast, the woman, I think her name was Rachel, stops putting out new episodes. And the woman, I think it's pronounced Sarah, but it's spelled S-E-R-R-A, which just didn't. You already have two perfectly good spellings of the name Sarah. And if you're looking to name your kid something different, don't go with any version of Sarah. So, but anyway, so Sarah decided to actually like go to this woman's home in this like isolated mountain area and try to find out what happened to her. The way this book reads almost is more like it's a horror novel. Like, everything's just very unsettling. I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy how unsettling everything was. I felt like there was no good payoff for it. None of the characters were likable. I thought it was going a completely different way with the plot. Like, I'm gonna skip ahead if you don't want any spoilers, because this is spoiling a little. I thought it was gonna turn out that Sarah was Rachel. Like, that she was the person that ran this podcast, but she had some kind of like mental break and dissociated and was thought she was a different person, because people kept calling her Rachel. And when she was like asking people where Rachel are, they'd give her these weird looks and be like, well, you know, Rachel. She's like, no, I don't know Rachel. Everyone's like, yeah, listen, Rachel's done this before. It's not that big of a deal. I thought it was going to turn out that Sarah was Rachel. And she wasn't. And then when it didn't go that way, I was just very confused by the whole thing. And the whole thing just did not make sense to me at all. I was confused by it. I didn't enjoy reading it. Unfortunately, I did not care for this book. I feel like someone else might, though. Like, I feel like someone else might be looking for something confusing and unsettling, and they might like this book, but it didn't work for me. And there's another thing too, where there's just like a lot of casual animal abuse in this book. And it's not like people are doing it and the main character's like, oh, that's fine. It's the main character's like, that's fucked up, we should stop that. But it just keeps happening. Like, there's all these neglected cats and dogs, and I think horses too, on this farm. It's like a farm, it's a ranch. Ranch is the word. And the main character, Sarah's like, someone should do something about this, but then she can't. It's not, like, none of the animals are being beat or anything. They're just being like really neglected, and I don't know, like, it's not... It's another device being used to make you feel uncomfortable, and I'm just not, I don't like that one especially. I really just don't. It makes me unhappy. But my least favorite book was still Strangers with the Same Dream, and I'm gonna do a video talking all about this because this was a book I read for my Buzzwordathon, so I'm gonna make a video about that. But this is a book about Jewish settlers, Zionists in the early 1920s, and it's just repetitive. And it's extremely boring for long stretches of it. And then it ends with like a terrible, graphic, upsetting ending that just, nope. Nope. I almost would have given it 1 star, except like the writing is solid. Like, I can tell this is a woman that can write a book, but just the book she wrote is not for me. So that's it. Let me know if you've read any of these books, and if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, leave a comment below, let me know. Please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.